For a long time, I have looked at advertisements for hiking and backpacking gear and thought the companies seemed to be implying something. It seemed they want us to think that if we only would buy their stuff, we would be as comfortable in the woods as we are at home. And finally, in recent months, I found a company that took that idea beyond a suggestion and said outright that their product would provide comfort that equals our home, quote unquote. On the face of it, I have no problem with companies trying to make money, and I want outdoor companies to succeed. I also understand that hikers, new hikers in particular, want to have nice things, and I support whatever gear choices they make. I have said many times here that trying to select backpacking gear is a chore, if not a pain in the neck. But that still leaves the question, can we in fact be as comfortable while backpacking as we are at home? You know, we feel good, we look good, everything is just fine, no problems. I'm inclined to say that sometimes we can, and by sometimes, I mean when we are out for only a few nights, or we aren't hiking many miles. And maybe we could be out longer than that and still think we are as comfy as we are at home. However, what if we are on a trail like the Appalachian Trail? What if we're covering close to 10 miles every day or more? What if we were climbing up and down huge hills several thousand vertical feet every day? What if we keep going and going because we want to exceed 100 miles or more? Under those circumstances, every passing day increases the odds that pretty soon the trail is going to feel nothing like home does. And specifically, things are going to get way more gross than they ever do at home. Even so, there are some things we can do to deal with those gross details. So if we haven't dealt with them before, let's review, in mostly no particular order, my nominees for the 5 most gross things about long-distance backpacking. The most obvious thing on this list is mud. Most obvious because when we have to hike through mud, there's no hiding the fact that we have been hiking through mud. On the AT, rain can fall in buckets, and it can rain all day long or all night long. A lot of the AT is just a dirt path, and given enough rain, it turns into a mud path. It's true, we will be walking on big rocks a lot of the time on the AT. When that happens, we just have to make sure we don't fall on the slippery rocks and land on all the other rocks. When heavy rain and mud strike, we're doing a good job if we can manage to keep the mud sticking to us confined below our knees. And if we take a nosedive in the stuff and slide a few feet along the ground, things will get worse, as one might imagine. A couple of times on the AT, I've walked in spots where the trail turned into a creek with water nearly a foot deep. When this happens, it will wash away a little of the mud, but it doesn't solve what I see as our biggest problem. Along the great majority of the AT, we are either climbing up a big hill or climbing down a big hill. And sometimes they are very, very big hills. Making sure we stay on our feet when we are climbing up or down in mud gets my vote for the most serious mud-related issue. I have always used trekking poles on the AT, and trekking poles help prevent falls. While I have fallen down on the AT, I would have experienced 5 or 10 times as many falls if I didn't use trekking poles. The next 2 items on the list are dirt and sweat. Sometimes they work together to conspire against us. I have dug ditches and worked in factories, and never ever have I gotten as downright filthy as I have on the AT. And sometimes it doesn't take too long for it to happen. Even without rain, the weather is sometimes dry enough for us to kick up little clouds of dirt and dust with every step. And by the way, I have never been as soaked with sweat from head to toe anywhere as badly as I have on the AT in the summer. I have had days when all my clothes were soaked with sweat, and my fanny pack was wet, and my pack against my back was wet. Dirt and sweat, it seems, like to work together. The sweatier we get, the more dirt sticks to us. During my first AT hike, I sat down on rocks or logs without thinking too much about it. That practice, by the way, made the seat of my pants exceedingly dirty. On every AT hike since then, I've carried at least a small piece of tarp to sit on or a piece of closed cell sleeping pad. If we hike in shorts, as I usually do, dirt and sweat make our legs filthy. Dirt on the AT seems tenacious because I've also ended up with filthy feet and socks. In case one thinks we can take a nice, refreshing shower every day on the AT, I'm afraid this is not possible. I will say that one night I stayed at a hostel, and as soon as I showed up, a hostel worker ordered me to take a shower. Like, right now, take a shower. There is one item that can help with dirt and sweat. I often look at gear lists that hikers post before getting on the AT, and most of the time I do not see the item I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is a bandana. In my case, I always carry at least 2 of them. One of them is tied to a pack strap, and I use it to wipe sweat from my face, and I do this many, many times. The other bandana I pull out when I can sit down next to a creek or running water. I wet the bandana and wash off my feet and legs. Then I rinse the bandana, wring it out, and tie it to the pack. There, it will usually dry out fairly quickly, despite the fact bandanas are cotton. Let me stress that this is a job I will not do next to every spring I see, because not all springs have running water. Many times, they are just a small pool of water, and we are glad to see them regardless. So let's keep those as clean as we find them. Once or twice along the AT, I took a shower at a place that provided no towels, and I did a good enough job drying myself off with 2 bandanas, wringing them out as needed. Compared to before the pandemic, I don't see bandanas for sale in as many stores these days, but I have found them at reasonable prices in farm supply stores if we can find one of those. Just as dirt and sweat work together against us, sweat also conspires to make us stink, and we can end up smelling pretty bad on the AT. The first thru hiker I ever met smelled so bad we would have noticed it had we been 20 yards downwind. If we are hiking by ourselves and aren't going into town, a lot of people will figure, okay, we stink, so what? However, bad body odor can be dealt with on the trail. Most people these days, and even years ago, carried with them some hand sanitizer. I also carry a small travel-sized container of deodorant. When I start to smell so bad that even I can't stand it, here's what I do. I rub some hand sanitizer in my armpits and then follow it up with some deodorant. And bingo, just like that, I don't smell as horrible. I was hiking with someone else once and provided this advice. My friend quickly volunteered that, wow, that really works. Yes, it does. Many have commented that synthetic clothes worn by hikers will smell bad. All I can say is, if I am stinking to high heaven, even a cotton shirt on me will also smell terrible. Also falling into the bad smells department are many of the privies I have visited along the AT. A number of them reeked so badly that I propped the door open with a rock and waited a minute or 2 before using the thing. This one, by the way, was brand new when I visited, and it was very nice. Notice the handrails. Federal rules now require that for new construction, even on the AT. And if we've been walking through mud, such handrails might come in handy. The last item on the list is blisters. Not only are they gross to look at, but they can be painful and they can slow us down. My strategy for preventing blisters has been a great success for me. I might have had a blister since I started doing it, but if so, I can't remember when it happened. The trick to what works for me is the socks I wear. I wear 2 socks on each foot, and each sock is thin 100% nylon. This approach has 2 big advantages. When wearing 2 of these socks on each foot, friction is reduced considerably. Our feet will not rub against the socks, and our feet will not rub against the shoes. What happens instead is that the 2 socks will rub against each other if they do any rubbing at all. Most of, if not all, the friction that occurs is between the socks. Our skin is left out of the equation and is therefore spared. In my experience, this cannot happen if I wear a pair of thick socks. I know. We are supposed to wear nice thick socks. I refuse, and I'll tell you why. I have worn thick socks on the AT. Thick socks that are all synthetic and theoretically should dry quickly. And they've been nice and cushiony, and they've also been nice and expensive. But because I sweat a lot, these socks get wet. And because they get wet, my skin gets damp. In my experience, damp skin will blister more easily than dry skin. On top of this, and perhaps worst of all, nothing I tried could get thick socks dry when I was on the AT. Carrying them tied on the outside of my pack would not get them dry. Maybe if they had been tied there for 10 days, maybe they would have dried out. But I got tired of them being damp all the time. If I ever carried them again, it was just to sleep in them. I mentioned that thin nylon socks have 2 advantages. The second advantage is they dry out fast. More than once I have stopped and laid out my tent and my socks, etc., to dry out in the sun, and I always carry spare socks. The worst thing I can say about thin nylon socks is that in 2023 it's difficult to find them in stores. This was not the case before the pandemic. I have a stash of them and will look online when I run out. I should point out that I've always hedged my bets, and I still do. On my very first AT hike, I wore leather boots and thick socks, and it's lucky for me that I carried white medical tape, the kind sold in drugstores. Because I had so many blisters, I really needed that tape. Covering a blister with medical tape makes it much easier to deal with. I still carry medical tape. Sometimes I carry Body Glide, and sometimes I carry some petroleum jelly in a small container. If a spot on my feet ever starts to worry me, I'll tape it and put the Body Glide or Vaseline on the tape. Some companies sell tape specifically designed for our feet, and I bet they also do the job. We also should note the items I have talked about are typical in the American East, but perhaps not so typical in the American West. I have done some hiking in the West, enough to know that compared to the East, it doesn't rain as much and there isn't as much mud. And because the humidity tends to be much lower than in the East, usually we don't sweat as much in the West. 2 more things before we end. At least an unhonorable mention status goes to ticks. Because they can make us mighty sick, they certainly have the potential to dwarf the harm of everything else on my list. But it's also true that highly effective measures against ticks are very well known and widely used. Foremost among them is treating clothes with permethrin in advance of a hike. It's generally agreed permethrin will remain effective after clothes have been washed multiple times. To that I would add, do not walk through thick brush ever. That's where the risk of picking up a tick is the highest. Also, don't go commando. If we do, guess which area of the body ticks are likely to head for? Yes, it happened to me. Super gross, right? I also carry a small container of insect repellent. Carrying a small mirror can help us check ourselves when the opportunity is available. I also have read the tip of carrying a lint brush that uses sticky paper to wipe our clothes, which would pick up any loose ticks. Another dishonorable mention goes to toilet paper blooms, which happen out west when people defecate near a trail and make an attempt, sometimes half-hearted, to conceal it with rocks. The Pacific Crest Trail Association has something to say about this, and the link is in the description. And now, we're done. For those new to my channel, I have playlists for most of my videos set up by category with health and safety among them. The link to the playlists is in the description, along with links to my Twitter and Facebook. And, as always, thanks a million for watching.